there. We are in a new hour here at Live Now from Fox. I'd like to thank you all for joining us on this Monday. Turning now to another major headline from over the weekend and also showcasing this, a live image that we have out of Jerusalem in Israel. Israel on Sunday saying that it struck Lebanon's capital for the first time since June, saying it killed Hezbollah's chief of staff, Haytham Ali Tabatabai, and warning the Iran-backed militant group not to rearm and rebuild a year after their latest war. The strike in Beirut's southern suburbs killed 5 people and wounded 25 others, and that's according to Lebanon's health ministry. Hezbollah did confirm the death of that leader, and earlier it said the strike launched almost exactly a year after a ceasefire in the Israel-Hezbollah war threatened an escalation of attacks, just days before Pope Leo is scheduled to visit Lebanon on his first foreign trip. I want to talk more in depth about this by bringing onto the program now Benjamin Allison. He is a graduate fellow at Clements Center for National Security and a PhD candidate of history at the University of Texas in Austin. Benjamin, good to see you.
Good to see you, Carel.
So it was a pretty big deal when we saw those strikes yesterday. We actually had live images, so a lot of destruction in that aftermath. But talk to us a little bit here. The Associated Press says that Hezbollah has not attacked Israel since the start of their ceasefire. How significant is it that Israel not only attacked Lebanon, throwing strikes there, but more specifically Beirut? How does this propel the conflict forward?
So Beirut, of course, as the capital, is the most important city in all of Lebanon. The fact that Tabatabai was in Beirut on the outskirts, really, and that being where he was struck, it is a challenge in some ways to the central Lebanese government. That government has had trouble for decades now actually maintaining the use of force within its own borders. So, for example, in the 1970s into the 1980s, the Palestine Liberation Organization was a state within within Lebanon. That was a huge challenge to the central government's authority. Beginning in the mid-1980s, Hezbollah kind of took over that mantle. And the central government has always had trouble kind of maintaining control over its own territory and preventing these non-state actors such as Hezbollah and the PLO from acting from its borders against Israel. And so the fact that Israel struck Tabatabai in Beirut demonstrates really the central government's weakness, but also Israel's disregard for the central government in many ways. They had a ceasefire agreement beginning in November of 2024. It was negotiated by the U.S. and France between Lebanon and Israel. And Lebanon was given permission by Hezbollah Secretary General Naif Qassem to basically negotiate on Hezbollah's behalf. And the agreement was essentially that Hezbollah and Israeli forces would both leave southern Lebanon, which is basically the part of Lebanon that's closest to Israel. Hezbollah would have to go above the Litani River. And the Israelis would retreat back. Now, that hasn't been fully implemented yet, and that's part of the problem. The Israelis have been conducting strikes on Lebanon for quite a while since the ceasefire went into effect. The ceasefire agreement did not preclude the use of force for the purposes of self-defense, whether by Israel or by the Lebanese state. But what it did preclude was the offensive use of military force. Now, what self-defense means in these situations is a matter of debate. So, for example, Israeli military doctrine conceives of preemption as self-defense. And so for the IDF, they had been claiming for a while, and there does seem to be some evidence for it, that Hezbollah had been rearming. The Lebanese central government had basically made a law back in June, I believe, stating that they were going to reclaim the monopoly on the use of force, which is so critical to any state's existence within its borders, and that they were going to disarm Hezbollah in order to make sure that the Lebanese central government was the primary actor in terms of armed force within its borders. But that has since slowed down in a significant way, and now rearmament of Hezbollah is outpacing disarmament by the Lebanese government. And the IDF, Israeli intelligence services have been claiming that recently, as recently as 2 weeks ago, I believe, maybe 1 week ago, that the Lebanese armed forces were collaborating with Hezbollah. Whether that's true, whether that's something that's happening on a systemic level, that seems unlikely that the entire Lebanese armed forces is cooperating with Hezbollah in terms of giving them the cover of LAF vehicles to transport weapons and things like that. But it is possible that, of course, some actors on the ground within the Lebanese armed forces would be doing that. And so for the Israelis, they've been kind of making noises for a while that they might do something like this. They'd been doing smaller strikes, but the fact that they struck Beirut is a significant challenge, both to Hezbollah and to the Lebanese central government, and puts both in a pretty difficult situation.
It's interesting you mentioned some of these points because I've had experts on before that wouldn't describe the situation between Hezbollah and Israel and what's happening in Lebanon as a ceasefire, but more of a less fire, if you
Right.
will. I want to put up this, a social media post from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He says this, quote, it's what he said just last night. A few hours ago, the IDF eliminated Ali Tabatabai, the chief of staff of the Hezbollah terrorist organization. Tabatabai is a mass murderer. His hands are soaked in the blood of many Israelis and Americans. Talking a little bit more about this latest leader who was killed, he had been the apparent successor of Ibrahim Akil, who was killed in September of 2024 in those Israeli attacks that wiped out much of Hezbollah's senior leadership. Ben, my next question, how quickly does a group like this find replacements for its leaderships, and how does that affect its efforts to rebuild or coordinate attacks?
So it depends. It depends on the organization. So jihadist organizations and Islamist organizations do have a tendency to have a deep bench. So this was the problem with groups like, for example, Al Qaeda in Iraq, and to a lesser extent Al Qaeda Central itself, where basically decapitation operations, that is taking out the leadership, can have mixed effects. On the one hand, you can paralyze a group. You can make it more difficult for them to engage in attacks and things of this nature. On the other hand, you might end up bringing up someone, effectively by killing their boss, you might end up bringing up someone who actually is more radical or has a better strategic mind for planning attacks. And so this is a persistent challenge when you're dealing with these organizations in terms of, okay, we know that an attack is being planned, or we know that this particular leader is very dangerous, but then what does the bench look like effectively? In Tabatabai's case, he is one of, or was one of, I should say, the last remaining veteran leaders within Hezbollah. He had been the commander of their elite commando unit, Radwan, which would conduct attacks against Israel from time to time. They also operated in a significant way in the Syrian civil war on behalf of the Assad regime. They also had some operations in Yemen, of course, with the Houthis. So he was a very important figure. He was, as you said, the chief of staff of their military wing, and so this is a major shot across the bow by Israel, basically indicating we are not going to tolerate this rearmament, which is technically a violation of the ceasefire agreement. And Prime Minister Netanyahu, when the ceasefire was signed, although as you correctly noted, it wasn't much of a ceasefire to begin with, particularly on the Israeli side as far as actual shooting goes. He had made it clear that rearmament, digging of tunnels, Hezbollah presence south of the Litani River, all of those were going to be non-starters. Israel was going to maintain its freedom of military action within Lebanon. And it's interesting because it seems that the U.S. government had been trying to restrain Israel a little bit in Lebanon, trying to maintain this sort of fragile peace, because, of course, they want the Lebanese central government to succeed. They needed to have popular legitimacy in order to disarm Hezbollah successfully, et cetera, et cetera. But at the same time, and so for Israel to attack within Lebanon's borders, that erodes that popular legitimacy, and it increases legitimacy for Hezbollah among the local population, because they see Hezbollah, or many of them will see Hezbollah as guarantors of Lebanese independence, security, et cetera, compared to the Lebanese central government. Of course, this is not to say that Hezbollah actually is any of those things. They've been pretty ineffective against Israel. And Israel has, of course, decimated the the Hezbollah leadership over the last few years. And so, really, it's a complicated situation, but it is very clear that In the case of Tabatabai, he was a significant figure. Whether he was planning an imminent attack is unknown, but we do know for a fact that he was, in fact, working to rearm his group.
And then just one final question for you, Ben, because it would be amiss if we talk about Hezbollah without talking about Iran, who backs up this organization here. Have they issued any kind of response? Do we know how they may respond given the events of the past few hours?
It seems unlikely that Iran is going to do anything serious. They'll say a few things. They'll indicate that this is a violation of Lebanese sovereignty, which is correct. They will say that Tabatabai was a martyr, et cetera, et cetera. In terms of Iran actually engaging in any sort of violence against Israel, it seems highly unlikely. All of Iran's recent engagements with Israel, its military engagements, which really hadn't happened in a direct way before 2024, all of them have gone extremely poorly for Iran, to put it very mildly. So I do not expect any sort of significant Iranian response. Israeli intelligence is warning that they expect that Hezbollah itself might respond, but they won't. They don't think that they will respond directly, as in they don't expect an attack on Israel to be forthcoming. What they would expect to be more likely would be attacks on Israelis and potentially Americans in other countries, other third countries. Hezbollah has a presence throughout the world in small groups, including in Latin America, actually. And so it's definitely possible that we could see something like that forthcoming, but it remains to be seen.
Benjamin Allison, a graduate fellow at Clements Center for National Security, PhD candidate of history at the University of Texas in Austin. We appreciate your time here at Live Now from Fox. Take care.
Sure. You too.
All right, I do want to filter through some more of these social media posts that we have gotten more specifically from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Taking a look at this first one, he says this: "It is not for nothing that the U.S. put a bounty of $5 million on his head." Tabatabai served as a senior commander in the Radwan force. This is the force that prepared to conquer the Galilee and slaughter many of our citizens. We also have this. He says recently he led Hezbollah's renewed efforts to rearm. This is, of course, after the heavy blows Hezbollah suffered in the pager operation, in the damage to its missile stockpiles, and, of course, in the elimination of Nasrallah. And then finally this: "I thank the IDF and the security forces which carried out a professional, accurate, and successful operation today."